all about? I am a political scientist, right? This meaning that I study and explain how the political world works. It's not my job to offer my opinions. It's my job to explain how things work. So my work here stems from actual personal frustration, letting you know my opinions. I've been frustrated with being able to predict terrible outcomes in the world's authoritarian regimes. Looking around, seeing terrible things that are going to happen, knowing that they are going to happen, and then being frustrated by the fact that I am unable to do anything about it in my personal capacity. What are these things? Well, authoritarian regimes are involved in every single war. They're among the worst human rights abusers around the world. Authoritarian regimes tend to end just as violently or suddenly as they begin, and they are generally horrific in how they deal with individual people and individual rights all around the world. In authoritarian regimes all around the world, corruption is a feature, not a bug. And all of this, wars, corruption, by the way, is terrible for markets anywhere, especially in the long run. However, we have to recognize and know that authoritarian regimes around the world are sovereign states, but they are now interconnected with our markets and our politics in any number of ways that are quickly expanding, changing, and deepening. And so what this means is that it presents our policymakers with a core challenge. How are you going to go about addressing authoritarian regimes and authoritarian corruption without sacrificing our own values, without harming our own interests as free societies, or without harming our own capitalist markets? How are we going to do this? This is the core challenge. While we should not shy away from using our military and our economic power to defend our friends and ourselves and advance our own interests, this deepening and expanding of integration with authoritarian regimes means that these traditional methods of dealing with national security threats, such as military interventions and sanctions, that tend to treat these authoritarian states as unitary, isolated actors, are going to become less and less and less successful over time. On the converse side of that, liberal international institutions such as the World Trade Organization or the United Nations that tend to depend upon the dreams or the hopes of people for better action are going to continue to fall prey to illiberal actors around the world looking to influence them and bend them to their own will. So essentially, what I'm saying is that liberty needs a strategy. Democracy needs a strategy. The rule of law needs a strategy. And America especially needs a strategy for navigating the post-Cold War era of authoritarian regimes. To sum it up in a sentence, I would say we need to consolidate gains in liberty where it already exists, and then lead by example. So consolidate gains where they exist and then lead by example. Now, you might say, easier said than done, right? But it really is pretty simple. And what I've done is I've created a handy new concept, right, that can help explain why. The authoritarian corruption nexus. So the authoritarian corruption nexus is the growing convergence of licit and illicit state and non-state actors that facilitate and launder the profits of illegal activity, reinforcing the strength and survival of authoritarian states and systems of governance all around the world. In other words, that's kind of a big definition. So in other words, authoritarian governments, what they do is they abuse their access to US markets to prolong their own rule at home and gain strength. And in the meantime, what happens is that terrorist groups, international terrorist groups, transnational criminal organizations, use these exact same methods and avenues to support and gain strength in their own activities. So the nexus is where we need to focus, but the problem is that it overlaps into free societies and free markets as well. So in the report, what I do is I characterize modern great power competition as not a clash of civilizations, but as a clash of governance systems, right? This is freedom versus authoritarianism. Corruption in this, however one wants to conceptualize it, is first the method through which authoritarians around the world seek to remain in office. It's the method they use to remain in office. And second, it's the channel through which authoritarians infect free countries and free economies with greater amounts of corruption. So to be clear about this, getting to the term kleptocracies, because I've written a bunch about this. All authoritarian regimes, in my view, are a form of kleptocracy. Now, in foreign and defense questions, all of our enemies are authoritarian regimes, which are also kleptocracies. But not all authoritarian regimes are enemies. We have a lot of authoritarian regimes that we're friendly with, and that's okay. But that's no reason to simply turn a blind eye to the corruption that exists in those countries that's feeding this nexus. We need some adjustments, some recalibrations, if you will. So the first aspect, before I get into the policy recommendations I put forward here, the first is that American foreign policy in general just needs to make a clearer distinction between the people that suffer under authoritarian corruption and the regimes and leaders that create those conditions for those people. In other words, China is not the enemy. The Communist Party is. Iran is not our enemy. The Ayatollahs are. Russia and North Korea are not our enemies. The Putin and Kim Jong-un regimes are. To better understand these threats in a strategic and, as I've said many times, a non-violent manner, domestically, what we need to do is look in the mirror. And what we need to do is we need to deal with the abuse of anonymous shell company formation in the United States, number one. Second, I would say give the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, a clearer mission. What are they doing in the world? Who are the enemies? What are they trying to do? Third, we need to deal with money laundering in a better, more systematic way in real estate, which is outlined in the report. Fourth, clearly evaluate how the global network of foreign trade zones around the world work. There's some 3,500, 4,000 zones around the world that we don't know much about how they work. We don't even have a singular definition for them, and understanding how that works with all sorts of trade fraud and issues related to this. Fifth, I would say reevaluate the role of the Foreign Agents Registration Act in fighting disinformation campaigns, which I go into in the report as well. And then finally, give the private sector a greater role in anti-corruption efforts worldwide. This could be done fairly simply by amending the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act to punish the FCPA, to punish the demand side of bribery. Now, looking internationally outside of the United States, what I think is that we need to formalize the group of seven, the G7, which was the G8 until we haphazardly kicked Russia out in 2014. The G7 should be made as a formalized institution only for established democracies, which is what it essentially is now. It's not formal, and it doesn't have a charter. And in that charter for the G7, I think we need to provide a clear mechanism for ascension to the charter, to provide an attractant for other countries to reform, to want to get into the charter. And then we also need to have a clear method for expulsion, which is something that other international institutions lack, and we're seeing problems with that across Europe and other places. Lastly, I would say the Financial Action Task Force, which was created by the G7 in 1989, needs to find ways to refine its mutual evaluation reporting to look at how other countries are dealing with anti-money laundering, and also needs to step up to start focusing on trade-based money laundering, which trade-based money laundering is one of the least understood, most pervasive, worst elements of money laundering problems around the world that is right under our noses and we're not doing much about it. So in conclusion, I would say the rule of law and democracy are roads with no set end point. And I would say it's time to begin road improvements. And that's how we win this round of great power competition. Thank you.